An officer's petty rage over spilled coffee quickly escalated into a public display of power and humiliation. He was so caught up in the moment, he never noticed the silent observer who was about to turn his entire world upside down. The fluorescent lights of the Starlight Diner hummed a tired, buzzing tune, the kind of sound that burrows into your skull after an 80-hour work week. It was just after 9 p.m. on a Friday, and I was hunched over a lukewarm coffee and a stack of discovery files, trying to find the one loose thread that would unravel a particularly nasty fraud case. The scent of stale coffee and sizzling bacon grease was a welcome change from the sterile air of my office. All I wanted was a quiet burger and an hour of peace before heading home to my empty apartment. The diner was a classic slice of Americana red vinyl booths cracked with age, a long formica countertop polished by a million elbows, and a young waitress trying her best to keep up with the Friday night rush. Her name tag read Sarah, and she moved with a harried grace, a coffee pot in one hand and a tray of plates balanced on the other arm. She'd been my waitress, and despite being clearly overwhelmed, she had a kind smile and made sure my cup was never empty. I figured she was a college kid, trying to make tuition. She had that look of determined exhaustion I knew all too well. The trouble started when the bell above the door chimed, admitting 2 uniformed police officers. One was older, with a weary look that suggested he'd seen it all and was tired of looking. The other, the one who took the lead, was younger, with a military-style haircut and a chest puffed out with the kind of self-importance that only comes with a badge and a gun on your hip. They slid into the booth directly across from mine. I gave them a polite nod, the kind of automatic acknowledgement you give to law enforcement, and went back to my files. I deal with cops all day. Some are heroes, some are just guys doing a job, and a few are like this one. I could feel his arrogance from across the aisle. Let's call him Officer Miller. Sarah approached their table, notepad in hand. "Evening, officers. What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. Miller didn't even look up from his phone. "2 coffees, black, and be quick about it." His partner just grunted in agreement. Sarah scurried away. I watched her pour the coffee, her hands moving a little too fast. She grabbed the 2 heavy ceramic mugs and a small pitcher of creamer, balancing them on her small tray. As she turned back toward their booth, a kid who had been spinning on his stool a few feet away suddenly hopped down, bumping right into her. It happened in slow motion. The tray tilted and one of the full, scalding hot mugs of coffee went flying. It landed right in Officer Miller's lap. He roared, jumping to his feet as the dark liquid soaked the front of his uniform pants. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he bellowed, his voice cracking through the diner's low hum. The entire place went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Sarah stood frozen, her face as white as a sheet, the now empty tray trembling in her hands. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, officer. I'm so sorry. The little boy." "I don't care about the kid," Miller snapped, pointing a thick finger at her. "Are you blind or just stupid? Look at this. This is a uniform." The older partner was already on his feet, dabbing at Miller's leg with a napkin. "Calm down, Mark. It was an accident." But Miller wasn't having it. He was performing now, enjoying the audience. He glared at Sarah, who looked like she was about to either burst into tears or simply faint. "Sorry doesn't cut it. Do you know how much this costs? Do you have any idea the disrespect you just showed?" "Sir, I can pay for the cleaning," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll take it right out of my paycheck. I'm so sorry." I watched, my jaw tightening. I've cross-examined witnesses who've lied about murder with less venom than this cop was showing a kid who made a mistake. I kept my head down, pretending to read my file, but I was listening to every word, cataloging every detail. The abuse of power, the public humiliation. It was a familiar, ugly pattern. Miller took a step closer to her, looming over her small frame. His voice dropped, but it became even more menacing. "Cleaning isn't enough. You need to learn a lesson about respect for the badge." He pointed down at his boot, which had been splashed with a few drops of coffee. "You see that? You're going to clean it. Right now." Sarah stared at him, utterly confused. Clean your boots, sir." "That's what I said." The diner was so quiet you could hear the grease popping on the grill in the back. Sarah grabbed a napkin from a dispenser on a nearby table, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She bent down, but Miller held up a hand, stopping her. Ah, he said with a cruel smirk. Not like that. On your knees. A collective gasp went through the diner. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and fear. Tears were openly streaming down her face now. Please, sir, don't make me do this. You want to be charged with assault on a police officer, he threatened, his voice a low growl, because spilling scalding liquid on me could be interpreted that way. Now get on your knees and clean my boot like you mean it. His partner looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Mark, that's enough, he muttered, but Miller ignored him completely. His eyes were locked on Sarah, a predator enjoying its prey's terror. I saw the moment her spirit broke. The fight went out of her eyes, replaced by a hollow resignation. She took a shuddering breath, her body trembling as she slowly, agonizingly, began to lower herself to the dirty linoleum floor. That was it. That was the line. I slowly, deliberately closed the lid of my laptop. The quiet click seemed to echo in the tense silence. I placed my hands flat on the table, my decision made. This officer hadn't just crossed a line of decency. He was actively and publicly coercing a civilian under color of authority. And he had no idea he was doing it 3 feet away from a federal prosecutor for the U.S. Department of Justice. I pushed my chair back, the screech of its metal legs on the tile cutting through the suffocating tension. Every eye in the diner, including Sarah's tear-filled ones, swiveled to me. Officer Miller turned, his face a thundercloud of fury. You got a problem, pal, he snarled. I might, I said, my voice even and calm. I stood up slowly, leaving my files and laptop on the table. I'm just a little confused about procedure here, officer. Perhaps you can clarify. He took a step toward my booth, his hand instinctively dropping to the handle of his service weapon. It was a classic intimidation tactic. There's nothing to clarify. This is police business. Now sit down and finish your cold coffee before I decide you're interfering. Interfering with what? I asked, taking a step out of my booth to meet him in the aisle. I kept my hands visible, open at my sides. I don't see a crime being committed other than a potential one by you. So, for the record, are you ordering this young woman to kneel as part of an official investigation? Is she under arrest? The legal framing of the question seemed to throw him. His bluster faltered for a fraction of a second. The older partner's eyes widened slightly. He knew exactly what I was doing. It's about respecting the uniform, Miller shot back, recovering his footing. I have the utmost respect for the uniform, I replied, my voice never rising. I work with men and women who wear it with honor every single day. What I don't respect is an abuse of the authority that uniform represents. So, I'll ask again. Under what statute are you compelling a private citizen to perform a debasing act as punishment for an accident? Sarah, who was still halfway to the floor, had frozen completely, her eyes darting between me and the officer. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a tiny, flickering spark of hope. Miller's face was turning a blotchy red. He was used to unquestioning compliance, to people shrinking away from his badge. He wasn't used to being calmly and publicly questioned. Who the hell are you, some kind of lawyer? He spat. My profession is irrelevant, I said, holding his gaze. What's relevant is the law. And the law is very clear about coercion under color of authority. It's a federal offense. A felony, actually. It carries a hefty prison sentence. I'm sure your partner can confirm that for you. I glanced at the older officer, who now looked physically ill. He opened his mouth to say something to Miller, probably, Mark, just stop, but Miller cut him off. He was too deep in his own ego to see the cliff he was about to walk off. He saw my lack of uniform, my casual clothes, and saw nothing but a civilian he could bully into submission. That's it, he roared, pointing his finger back at me. You're done. You're officially interfering with a police officer. I want your ID. Now. You think you're so smart? Let's see who you are. Let's run your name, see what kind of upstanding citizen we're dealing with here. The older partner put a hand on Miller's arm. Mark, let it go. Let's just go. No. Miller shook him off. His eyes locked on me, blazing with humiliated rage. He wanted to get involved. He's involved. ID on the table. Or I'm taking you downtown for failure to identify and obstruction of justice. The whole diner held its breath. This was the moment he had been pushing for, the point where he could reassert his dominance by running my name through a system, digging for a forgotten parking ticket or anything else he could use as leverage. He thought he was cornering me. In reality, he had just handed me the exact opening I was waiting for. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "All right, officer. You want to see my identification? You've got it." I slowly reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket. I could feel the stiff leather of my wallet, and right behind it, the hard case containing the credentials he was so desperate to see. This was going to be so much worse for him than just paying a dry cleaning bill. He wanted to know who I was. He was about to find out. I pulled out my wallet, and from the compartment behind it, my credentials. It wasn't my state-issued driver's license. It was a dark leather bifold case. I flipped it open and placed it gently on the edge of his table, right next to a salt shaker. The gold seal of the Department of Justice gleamed under the cheap fluorescent lights, positioned just above my photo and my title, Assistant United States Attorney. Miller squinted, his brain slowly processing what his eyes were seeing. The arrogant smirk on his face didn't just fade. It evaporated, collapsing inward like a black hole. The blotchy red in his cheeks was replaced by a sickly, pale white. His mouth hung open slightly, a silent "oh" forming on his lips. His partner leaned over, saw the credentials, and took a full step back, his expression a perfect mask of dread. He looked like a man who just watched his friend gleefully jump onto a live grenade. "You wanted to know who I am, Officer Miller," I said, my voice dropping into the precise, measured tone I use in a courtroom. "There you have it. Now it's my turn to ask some questions, and you'll find I'm much more persistent." I picked up my credentials and put them back in my pocket. "Let's review the last 5 minutes, shall we? In front of at least a dozen witnesses, I have observed you, a sworn officer of the law, attempt to coerce a private citizen, Miss Sarah." I nodded toward the still frozen waitress, into a degrading act under threat of arrest. "That, officer, is a clear violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code. Deprivation of rights under color of law. It's a felony I've personally prosecuted more than a dozen times. Cops who thought they were above the law are currently serving hard time in federal prison because of it." Miller was speechless. He looked from me to his partner, who refused to meet his gaze, instead staring intently at the diner's checkered floor. "Furthermore," I continued, ticking the points off in my head, "when I, a citizen, questioned the legality of your actions, you attempted to intimidate me. You threatened me with arrest on bogus charges of interference and failure to identify, in a transparent attempt to silence me and prevent me from witnessing your crime. That could very well be construed as witness tampering, another federal felony." I let the words hang in the air. The silence in the diner was no longer tense. It was crystalline. Everyone was motionless, watching the power dynamic in the room execute a perfect 180-degree flip. Sarah had slowly pushed herself back to her feet, her hand over her mouth as she stared at me. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced with utter disbelief. I turned my attention to the older, smarter partner. "Officer," I said, my voice sharp and commanding, "take out your notepad. You are to take down the full name and contact information of every single person in this diner, including all staff. They are all material witnesses in a federal investigation that is beginning right now. Do you understand me?" He nodded numbly, his hand already fumbling for his notepad. "Yes, sir." "Good," I said. I then looked back at Miller, who was sweating profusely now, his carefully constructed tough guy facade completely demolished. "Officer Miller, you will not leave. You will not speak to your partner. You will not use your radio, and you will not touch your phone. You will sit in that booth and wait. Is that clear?" He could only manage a weak, strangled nod. The bully was gone. All that was left was a scared man who had just destroyed his own life over a spilled cup of coffee. I pulled out my cell phone. The eyes of every person in the diner followed it as I scrolled through my contacts. I found the number I was looking for and pressed call. I turned my back to the two officers, giving them a clear view of the DOJ logo on my credential case as I held the phone to my ear. The line picked up after a single ring. "Agent Davies," I said, my voice calm and professional. "It's Mark Ryder. Sorry to bother you on a Friday night, but I'm at the Starlight Diner on Elm and 4th. I've just witnessed a civil rights violation by a uniformed city police officer. I need a team here to secure the scene and take statements. And listen, do me a favor. Place a call to Police Chief Anderson's personal cell. Let him know that 2 of his boys are currently the subjects of a federal probe, and I'd advise him to get down here immediately. His department has a very big problem." The next 15 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. As I stayed on the phone with the FBI, relaying badge numbers and a concise summary of the incident, Officer Miller sat in his booth, looking like he was about to vomit. His partner, whose name I learned was Officer Grant, did exactly as I instructed, moving from table to table with his notepad. His voice a low, apologetic murmur. The other patrons, a mix of late-night diners and a few truckers, spoke in hushed tones, but their expressions were clear. They were seeing a kind of justice they didn't often get to witness firsthand. Sarah, the young waitress, had been guided to a stool at the far end of the counter by the diner's owner, a burly man named Gus, who now stood with his arms crossed, glaring at Miller with undisguised contempt. Gus brought Sarah a glass of water, and I saw her hands were still shaking as she tried to take a sip. The first to arrive, even before the FBI, was Police Chief Anderson. He burst through the diner door, his face a mask of grim determination. He was a big man, a cop's cop from the old school, but he was also politically savvy enough to know what a federal investigation into his department meant. He saw me on the phone, saw the state his 2 officers were in, and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. He walked straight over to me as I ended my call. "Mr. Ryder, I'm Chief Anderson. I got a call from Agent Davies. He said there was an incident." "An incident is putting it mildly, Chief," I said, not offering a handshake. "Your officer over there, Miller, was about 30 seconds away from forcing a civilian to kneel and clean his boots on threat of arrest, in public, for spilling coffee on him." Anderson's eyes narrowed as he glanced at Miller, his jaw tightening into a knot of granite. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, directed at the 2 officers. Grant spoke up immediately. "Yes, Chief. It's true. I told him to stop." Anderson's gaze fell on Miller, who flinched like he'd been struck. "Officer Miller," the chief said, his voice dangerously quiet, "place your sidearm and your badge on the table. Now." Miller fumbled with his duty belt, his hands clumsy and slick with sweat. He unholstered his weapon with a trembling hand and laid it on the Formica tabletop with a heavy thud. He unclipped his badge, the shiny silver symbol of his authority, and placed it beside the gun. He looked like a king who had just been stripped of his crown. "You're on administrative leave. Effective immediately," Anderson stated, his voice like ice. "There will be a full internal affairs investigation, but frankly, from what I'm hearing, you'd be better off resigning. You've brought shame on this department and this uniform." He then looked at me. "Mr. Ryder, my department will cooperate fully with your investigation. Whatever you need, you'll have it." Just then, 2 black sedans pulled up outside, and Agent Davies and his team entered the diner. They were professional, efficient, and immediately took control. Davies, a sharp-eyed agent I'd worked with on several cases, came over and shook my hand. "Mark, you never do things quietly, do you?" "You know me, Dave. I hate a boring Friday night," I replied with a half-smile. "That young lady at the counter is our victim. Please be gentle with her." Davies nodded and dispatched one of his female agents to speak with Sarah. I watched as the agent approached her, not as a cop, but as a comforting presence, her voice low and soothing. For the first time all night, I saw the tension in Sarah's shoulders begin to relax. With the scene secure and the investigation underway, I felt my own adrenaline start to fade. I gathered my files and my laptop. As I walked to the counter to pay my bill, Gus waved me away. "It's on the house," he said gruffly. "For, you know." I nodded my thanks and turned to leave, but a small voice stopped me. "Excuse me, sir?" It was Sarah. She had stood up from her stool and was looking at me, her eyes still red-rimmed but no longer filled with fear. They were filled with a profound, overwhelming gratitude. I don't know what to say. I was so scared. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, I said softly. His job is to protect and serve the public, not to terrorize it. My job is to make sure he remembers that. No one, no matter what uniform they wear, is above the law. She took a shaky breath, and then, to my surprise, she smiled. It wasn't the harried professional smile she'd given me earlier. It was real. Well, thank you. You're like a real-life superhero or something. I chuckled. Hardly. I'm just a guy who hates bullies. I gave her a final nod and walked out of the Starlight Diner, leaving the flashing blue and red lights behind me. The next Monday, I got a call from Chief Anderson. Miller had resigned, effective immediately. Facing a federal indictment and the loss of his pension, he took the only way out he had. The chief also informed me that Officer Grant had given a full and damning statement against his former partner and would be facing a suspension for his initial inaction, but would keep his job. As for Sarah, the department had reached out to her directly with a formal apology from the chief himself and had offered to pay for a full semester of her college tuition as a gesture of goodwill. It wasn't justice, not completely, but it was a start. Sometimes justice doesn't happen in a grand courtroom with a gavel and a jury. Sometimes it happens on a Friday night, under the humming fluorescent lights of a tired diner, all because one man in a position of power forgot that you never, ever know who might be watching.